A discussion on the need and prospects of electing a female president is next. We'll hear from author Camille Paglia. She spoke last month at Yale University. Her remarks last an hour and a half.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Yale Political Union. It is my pleasure to welcome back Ms. Camille Paglia for her third appearance on the floor of this body. Ms. Paglia received her bachelor's degree from SUNY Binghamton and received her master's of philosophy and her PhD from Yale University. She's currently professor of humanities at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia and is a renowned scholar, culture critic, feminist, and free speech advocate. Ms. Paglia is the best-selling author of Sexual Persona, Art and Decadence from Nefertiti to Emily Dickinson, Sex, Art, and American Culture, and her most recent work, Vamps and Tramps. Tonight, Ms. Paglia will present a keynote address on the resolution I will now move. Be it hereby resolved that America needs a female president. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Camille Paglia.
Madam Speaker and the Union, I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be here, and indeed in this space. As a graduate student from 1968 to 72, many times I was at the law school in this very auditorium where I saw many classic films, and indeed, a night I will never forget, saw All About Eve with the director here, Joseph Mankiewicz, and this is one of the cardinal points of my life, and it's a wonderful segue into tonight's topic that America needs a female president. Because Betty Davis and her performance in All About Eve, as one of the great products of the Hollywood star system of the 1930s and 40s and 50s, shows that America is used to a woman as dominatrix, and that the absence of a woman in the principal position in the White House is a historical accident that must be remedied as soon as possible. I have a series of arguments here for you tonight, and I think, first of all, the argument based on equity. After 200 years, 200 and a quarter really, quarter century of women having to listen to men, on, and white men too, I think the time has come in the year 2000 for women to move to center stage. Surely I speak for the women of America in protesting against the rapid decision by the media in the last few weeks that the vice presidential debate between Al Gore and Jack Kemp is a forecast of the election in the year 2000. How dare they? With what smug complacence has the media already decided that these two white guys are going to be the principal nominees of our parties? It is outrageous. We women of America have been waiting since we finally gained the vote in 1920 for a woman to take power. We've had only one example of a nomination at the very top level, Geraldine Ferraro in 1984. It is no coincidence, may I say, Madam Speaker, that Geraldine Ferraro was Italian-American. I feel it is Italian-American women, yes. Italian-American women have the moxie, have the attitude, have the aggression, I feel, to be world leaders. But it is pathetic that in these 2 centuries we have the endless suits and the droning that goes on and the usual white men. Enough already. Okay, so we women demand equal time. Simply on the basis of the great feminist principle of equal opportunity, I demand that there be a candidate from one of the 2 parties for the presidency in the year 2000 who is a woman. Now, and it's about time as well that men experience power being leveled at them. It is a time that they take a submissive posture to power pouring down from a hierarchical position. Secondly, I would like to present an argument based on impatience, boredom, and tedium. I am simply tired. I am simply tired of it. I think that most women in America similarly are tired. The same old male voices, the same old arguments. There is a kind of dullness that male candidates seem to specialize in. Enough already. All right. Thirdly, I would like to present an argument based on astrological synchronicity. The Irish poet William Butler Yeats based his theory of history on astrology, the 2,000-year cycles that have been going on every millennium. We are approaching the end of the millennium. Yeats spoke of the great symbol of this past age, the age of Pisces, as being Mary with her infant child. The symbol for him of the age of Aries that preceded that was Leda, raped by Zeus and producing a vast number of eggs, which caused the Trojan War and a whole other series of disasters, but also which gave the subject matter to Homer and to Aeschylus and therefore launched all of Western culture. So, I say, our next 2,000-year cycle is about to begin, and following from the Yeatsian paradigm, we would expect a woman, similarly, to be a symbol, but no more Mary, the obedient and silent woman who conceives a son without apparent sex and enjoyment of same, totally pure. We are ready now for a woman to take over and to be the ultimate symbol of the next millennium. I would ask the deity of that period to be not Zeus, not Jehovah, but Athena. Athena, born parthenogenetically from the brow of Zeus, stands for a woman's mental energy. She is an armed goddess. She is a guerrilla fighter. She's ready for war. She's ready to command the military, as any female president must. So I ask that the next millennium be, again, characterized by a woman and be inaugurated by our first woman president. And I base my appeal to astrology on my identity as a 60s person. Astrology is too little spoken of these days. Alas, it still is consigned to the bottom of the comics page in daily newspapers and the back of TV Guide. But every single woman's magazine has an astrological page. This is often overlooked, you see, by feminists and others. Women tend to believe in the great cycle of nature, the great wheel of the universe. So I feel that, again, astrological synchronicity makes it imperative that a woman take power in the White House in the year 2000. Next, I have my argument based on efficiency. That is, woman seems to me, by virtue of being a woman, to have a kind of power of organization, an ability to operate on a day-to-day level in a kind of multi-tracked basis. Man has tunnel vision. Man is narrow, intense but narrow. Man's consciousness is like a laser beam. Sexually and mentally, man plunges forward but sees nothing at all of context. Woman's consciousness is global in every sense. Woman sees the full perimeter of any given room, any given social situation, and therefore how appropriate that a woman should take power in the White House and therefore exert power on a global basis. Is this something that nature has given woman as a special gift? I think this is an idea coming out of my own women's course at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, that possibly woman's history as a mother, and a mother of once very large families that were 6, 8, 10, 12 children, it may very well be that woman's brain is extraordinarily complex to be able to intuit the special needs of her progeny who are at every single age of development. This is an advanced form of consciousness that no man is capable of. a woman who has a newborn and also a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. She has to be thinking on so many different levels at any given moment. Now, men, as we well know, are incapable of really contributing fully to the household. We know this, that every attempt by my generation to draft men into equal work has failed, that ultimately woman remains master of the household, and the husband, who may indeed be sweeping the floor or taking out the garbage or doing the beds, is simply one of many peons in woman's system. Woman still assigns him his tasks. This is well known. Ask around. All right? The man is incapable of actually doing the kind of complex scheduling that any housewife must do. The soccer moms, who are so much debated these days, the soccer moms who rush off and deposit their children at the game and then going back and forth between household chores and their own jobs and managing their husbands and so on. These women are ready for the White House. All right? The kinds of organizational skills that these women are exercising on a day-to-day basis, it staggers the mind. These women are obviously, even though they may be suburban women, they are on a track to Washington. I expect to see them by the year 2000. Now, my next argument is based on example. We need a woman leader in the White House, and a woman leader who is not a slave to the feminist establishment. We do not want a woman leader we want a woman who believes in the great feminist principle of equal opportunity, but we do not want a woman leader who is on the leash of the Gloria Steinem contingent. We do not want a woman leader who believes in special protections for women, who believes in infantilizing women. A very typical example would be the sexual harassment guidelines that have gotten utterly out of control in America. Now, I personally, as a feminist, support moderate sexual harassment regulations and indeed lobbied for their adoption at my university in 1986. But the hostile workplace category, which has swelled up like a monstrous kind of dragon in America, has led to abuse after abuse, offenses to reason, leading to this ludicrous case of 2 weeks ago where a 6-year-old boy kissed another girl and was brought up on sexual harassment charges. America looks ridiculous in the eyes of the world. It is ridiculous. It is grotesque, this kind of intrusion by wooden-minded administrators into the everyday life of children. This is not the way to produce strong women, to have an intrusion by authority figures, whether teachers or superintendents or lawyers, into women's dealing with boys on a day-to-day basis. The schoolyard should be a place where women learn to be strong, not where women continue their infantile dependence on the authority figures who have protected women for so many thousands of years. So I would hope that our first female president would be a woman who speaks for all women, but also all men. A woman who represents all genders, all, at last count, 15 of them. I include drag queens in that as well. Oh, are there drag queens here? I do not. We want a kind of a leader who I think was very well typified by Governor Ann Richards of Texas. The Texas feminists had a kind of feistiness and robustness that I think so many East Coast feminists often lack. My theory about that is that the Texas women still feel very close to nature. They're pioneer women. Even when Governor Ann Richards was all dolled up with her blonde chignon and her pearls and her suits and so on, you could see the kind of woman who was out there helping to herd the cows and on the ranch and and there are so many other examples too. I've written about the Marjorie Main character who runs the ranch for divorcees in Reno in the film of The Women. women, and you have an incredible power to the old rural women that too much contemporary feminist rhetoric fails to take account of. Too much of current feminist ideology is based on the premise of the white upper middle class woman, when in fact the women of the countryside, you can see wherever you go to a small village, not just down south or in New England and Vermont, but anywhere in the world, in my own, in Italy, where my mother was born, the women are extraordinarily aggressive, extraordinarily outspoken. The feminist, conventional feminist portrait of history as nothing but male oppression and female victimization is quite wrong. People who have projected that scenario have given to young women, number one, a poisoned heritage filled with lies. But beyond that, there is a kind of distortion of the actual experience of women. I think that you can feel some flavor of that greater freedom of the rural woman in the Odyssey, in that episode where Odysseus wakes up on the beach and has shipwrecked, he's nude, he's covered with leaves and so on, and he hears the sounds of girls laughing and playing, and it's the Princess Nausicaa who has come down to the seaside with her serving maids to do the laundry. And they're playing and they're laughing, etc., etc. There's an absolute continuity of that in the Mediterranean world, right down into the Italian villages of my own family. That is exactly the festive feeling of women in groups in the countryside. Many of the ills which contemporary feminism is constantly speaking of, in fact, have to do with the experience of women following the Industrial Revolution. The experience of middle-class women isolated in the home, cut off from the kind of collegiality that women had always had. Once there was the world of women and the world of men. The sexes didn't have that much to do with each other. I mean, there was breeding, and that was basically it. The sexes have never really gotten along. The folly of the last 25 years of so much feminist thinking is to imagine that the failure of communication between the sexes is due to male villainy, and that if we can just change men, if we can just reshape them in a female image, make them women, then everything will be fine. As this enterprise has gone on, men have progressively shrunk. Many feminists have succeeded in this. When I go to the Ivy League campuses, I see it all the time. I see the young men who are the products of good middle-class homes, who are very respectful to women and are desperate for approval from the resident feminists. They do everything that the feminists ask them to do, and the more they behave like that, the less the women want to date them. So I want men to recover some sense of their manhood, and it may be, there's applause from both men and women here, and it may be that women will have to accept a certain amount of discomfort in their relations with men. It may be that a lot of the sizzle of sexuality comes from this difference, that there is conflict built into sexuality. The attempt by the feminist establishment to erase that, to say that turbulence has a merely socially constructive origin, has failed. It has not brought sexual happiness. One cannot say that the men and women in America in the late 90s have found sexual happiness through feminism, not when you have a divorce rate of something like 40% in this country. So I feel that we need a woman in the White House to set an example as a role model for women, a woman leader whose very presence in the White House will give the lie to so much of the infantilizing character, as I said, of sexual harassment thinking these days. I want a woman to go into the arena. The arena is a place that is filled with beasts, where blood is shed. It is not a place where one sex, one gender should be favored over another. We cannot make reparations for historical inequities by committing further injustices in the present. So I would like, again, a woman in the White House who has to face the necessity for being commander-in-chief of the military. Now, here is one of the problems that must face any woman leader. We have had woman leaders in the past. As a matter of fact, India, Israel, Ireland have had woman leaders. Whether the I beginning those countries is significant, possibly suggests the expansion of ego necessary for any woman to truly attain the top rank of a society. But Margaret Thatcher, at any rate, demonstrated, applause from the conservatives for Margaret Thatcher here. Margaret Thatcher demonstrated that a modern woman can lead a nation. Interestingly, it is conservative women, not liberal women, who have shown that they are ready to be able to enter warfare on the same level as men. Liberal women are too much mired in domestic issues. However important social welfare issues are, if women expect to break through the glass ceiling to the topmost position in any society, including ours, they must begin to meditate on what that role of president will entail, especially in a very unstable world, such as the present one, where a president must make an instantaneous decision about whether to launch 41 missiles before breakfast, as Jack Kemp said in his vice presidential debate. It is a difficult matter to have women wielding the arms of war. That's why I feel that a style of education of women based on Amazonism, this is what I espouse, rather than on bourgeois gentility, okay, which is what Patricia Schroeder and Gloria Steinem and the rest of their ilk espouse. I think that only by raising strong, combative women will we ever be able to produce a nominee for the White House that can assure the male voters in the country that she is tough enough to be able to wage war if it is necessary to wage war. Being a president in America is very, very difficult. We have been in a period, which is why Clinton has done so well in the White House, where domestic issues have been in the forefront. With the decline of the Soviet Union, the lack of an enemy on the world stage, the military has no doubt diminished in prestige, and many liberals falsely think that we can continue to cut the military budget and that the era of great world wars is over. We can afford to go slack, we can afford to be relaxed. But any study of history shows that violence bursts out unexpectedly, that maniacs arise with a lust for power, that small nations may see their manifest destiny in empire, and we have to be always prepared. If I were to think of a way to train future female leaders for the presidency, I would say that they should be required to study military history and military strategy, in which Yale is actually distinguished. That should be a requirement. These women's studies courses have to go. They are the future president of America, who is a woman, will have studied the history of war and have understood it. In the absence of that, I have recommended that women study football. Now, football is our version of war. Indeed, it influenced the strategy in the Gulf War of several years ago. No one could possibly understand what General Schwarzkopf was talking about if they did not have a mastery of football terminology. Football, which so many feminists have insulted, have declared to be a source of sexism in society, football is a crystallization of offensive and defensive strategies. The entire history of human warfare is contained in the great sport of football. Our first female president will be a football fan. Now, I would like to go on to my next argument, which is based on experience. As we look back through history, we do see some prominent women, too few in number, but enough to inspire today's young women. We can go all the way back to ancient Egypt, Queen Hatshepsut, who apparently was quite an operator, maneuvered all of her male family members out of the way, elbowed them and ruled, and indeed is known to us even in the history of architecture as having been the patron of an unfinished funerary temple that is the first surviving example of an exterior colonnade. The Greeks, of course, took that for their temples, which is many hundreds of years later. It is the form of the exterior colonnade of the Parthenon and so on. Another great Egyptian queen, as far as we can understand, Nefertiti, who never was fully exercising the power of Pharaoh on the throne in the way that Hatshepsut did, but who probably was standing in for her rather sickly and artistic husband, Akhenaten, one of the most important rulers in the ancient world. Nefertiti, whose image has come down to us, one of the most beautiful objects from the ancient world. Cleopatra, who was obviously multidimensional and managed to enamor two quite different men, Julius Caesar, stern man who didn't drink, and Mark Antony, who did nothing else. A robust man of the world. Cleopatra, except for her military error at the Battle of Actium, would have conquered the far less competent soldier Octavian, and the entire balance of Western history would have been different. The center of power would have shifted away from Rome, away from continental Europe, toward Africa, toward Egypt. But it was a mistake she made in that naval battle at Actium. And those of you who are in some doubt about this story, I recommend to you the Elizabeth Taylor epic, Cleopatra. Certainly, Liz's beauty is in excess of the historical reality, but nevertheless, so much else about that movie is wonderful. The way Rex Harrison as Julius Caesar is able to embody the persona of a leader. Again, I feel that our young women who want to take center stage in American politics should be studying these precedents. When in these great epic films produced by Hollywood at its high point, you find a leader being represented as well as Rex Harrison performs the role of Julius Caesar. There is a lesson in that for young women. The error of women's studies courses is to say that women can only learn from other women, and that second-rate and third-rate women who were victims should be the source of their rage, their energy, and so on. And I think that is pernicious. It's a terrible thing to do to ambitious young women, and that instead an enlightened feminism of the 21st century will say, no, future women leaders must look to the great men as well as great women of the past. I have learned an enormous amount from studying great men in art, great men in philosophy, in criticism, in politics, and what has happened to the old style of hero worship that was the inspiration for young people in the old days. We belong to a time where it is fashionable to cut down. the post-structuralist kind of sneering style, the postmodernist thing of cutting everything into fragments, everyone adopting a pose of shallow irony and so on. Well, I am an Italian, and I'm an enthusiast. I do not believe in minimalism. I believe in maximalism. I believe in great ideas and great efforts. The biggest dream you can have, you can bring to pass. I had a dream right here on this campus, as I was sitting in Sterling Library for so many years. I had a dream of a mega book that would begin with cave art and go all the way to the Rolling Stones. All right, and I dreamed it, and it came to pass. And that goes also for any woman who aspires to the topmost post of this nation. She must study everything great men have done. That is the book. The book of history is the book she must study. She must enroll in no women's studies courses. That is taking a wrong turn. All right? There is a mental fog in those rooms, a fog that will paralyze her, that will destroy the neurotransmitters in her brain. And we have other examples as well. Of course, Queen Elizabeth I, not exactly a whole woman in her terror of sexuality, but we have Queen Christina, who was a little bit gender-bending and offered a great performance opportunity to Greta Garbo. We have Catherine the Great, and then applause for Catherine the Great. And then in our own century, many interesting women, from Madame Chiang Kai-shek to Imelda Marcos and Ivana Trump. But in terms of contemporary women on the scene, I think that both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have a lot of promising young people, male and female, who are headed for prominence. I would just like people to think, however, about Christine Todd Whitman, the governor of New Jersey. Since I live in Philadelphia, I see her on television quite a bit. I knew nothing of her when she won the governorship. I saw that very day on television, she bicycled to the voting booth, to the polling place. I saw a woman arriving on a bicycle wearing a parka, and I sat up in bed and I went, that woman's going to be president. I saw it. I don't know what it was. The more I learned about Christine Todd Whitman, I realized that she belongs to the horsey set. You know, this kind of, this old, oh, there's some applause for the horsey set here as well. Her athleticism, okay, and indeed her strange, very tall, almost admiral-like bearing, her rather masculine, profile, the way she literally stands above the crowd. She has a wonderful manner. Whether you are a Democrat, as I am, or Republican, I think that the example of Christine Todd Whitman is, again, very inspiring to contemporary young women. When the camera is on her, she reminds me a little bit of Margaret Thatcher, whose policies were very controversial in England, but whom we only know here through television. And she was a master of television, so that I think that we who don't have to experience the consequences of her decisions could have a slightly frivolous view of her, and even risk some admiration. She has, Christine Todd Whitman, like Margaret Thatcher, has this ability to deal with crises in a style that is both commanding and authoritative, and yet empathic. Now, Bill Clinton has the empathic part. He's had a little trouble finding the authority part, all right? But he's getting there. He's learning, I think, year by year. Unfortunately, we've had to suffer his mistakes year after year. But I think the really successful women governors and Margaret Thatcher as well have this kind of cross-sexual power to be both in control of the situation when the camera comes up to them very quickly and the microphone is thrust into their face, say there's some disaster they have to react to. And then they have this ability to feel deeply that comes across on television. And television, whether we like it or not, is the medium of contemporary politics and will continue to be that in the 21st century, for good and for ill. Todd Whitman, for example, in a recent storm, hurricane, tornado that had wreaked great destruction in southern New Jersey, went there, went to the farm, okay, was talking with the farmer, all right, and going to observe the barn, which was now all a mess and so on and so forth. And I thought, this is really remarkable. There she is in her pants and her parka again and her mud boots, and she's just out there and running around. I thought, yes, this is the style. This is going to be the style. Whether it is Christine Todd Whitman or not, who is the first female president, this will be or should be the style of our first woman president. It's a style which is there's like a strong, luminous consciousness, an authoritative, kind of aggressive style that's there, a kind of military bearing, and there is this empathic undercurrent, the emotional experience that Christine Todd Whitman has had as a mother and so on, right? And there is this kind of adaptability. Now again, Bill Clinton has this. Bill Clinton has this, and I've written on both Clintons, very controversially, and I've gotten a lot of abuse for it, but boy, touch Miss Hillary and you have hordes of banshees after you. You can't believe him. But Bill Clinton's style, what has endeared him to the public, despite his hundreds of mistakes, policy errors, and general incompetence, and endless numbers of scandals in the White House that the Republicans, for some reason, refuse to bring to attention. This female side of him, or the female side that he has absorbed from his very powerful mother. And of course, we know that Clinton had, the absent father figure. His real father was killed in an accident before Bill Clinton was even born. He had a kind of abusive stepfather. So there was an absence of positive masculine role models in his past. And what Clinton has, and this is why there is the notorious gender gap, which Rush Limbaugh calls the arousal gap, why women seem to cotton to Bill Clinton so much, is that he's like a kind of Huck Finn figure. He is the bad boy who, no matter what he does, you just want to forgive him and you want to nurture him, and he needs you to sort of help him, take him by the hand, and and we know how he can wring a tear so quick. He has that mercurial female ability to cry on cue. We know all about that. And he loves funerals. Funerals are his forte. He just loves a funeral. That long line of people and the long embraces allows him to publicly embrace women without scandal. As long as he keeps crying and so on. I admire that, though, and I think that when you turn on the television at night after a long day at work and so on, you sort of just like to see him. There he is, buoyant and bouncy. He likes his job, whereas Bob Dole doesn't like anything. Is there anything? Bob Dole has no hobbies, he has no interests, their idea of a great evening, they go home and they like have Chinese food and watch a video. Well, actually, that's kind of like my life too, but one wants one's president to be somewhat more multidimensional. So at any rate, since we have seen that Bill Clinton has so beautifully absorbed the mercurial character, chameleon-like character of woman's emotional life, we're ready now for a real woman in the White House, you see. Now, I think also that the example of Geraldine Ferraro is worth bringing up again, because at the time when Geraldine Ferraro was a nominee for the vice presidency, many people found her too strident, partly because of her New York background. People were not ready yet, probably, for a New York woman, a particular style of aggressive attack and so on. But notice how she has mellowed over the years. Now that she is, she worked as the special ambassador to the UN and so on, I believe to the Geneva Commission, and now she is a co-host, of course, on Crossfire, and I think that she does women proud on Crossfire. She is the first woman, I think, to really be able to go toe-to-toe with those jackasses on those shows, okay? Those obnoxious men. I mean, those other shows, the pathetic examples of womanhood, it embarrasses me as a woman. Margaret Carlson, okay, with her little nun's look and her little tee-hee-hee, okay, and all the men abuse her. She's like the little dormouse in Alice in Wonderland. Okay, everyone like abuses her, and she just can't seem to deal with everyone insulting her and so on. Or Eleanor Clift, that hatchet woman for the feminist establishment. She doesn't speak from me or any woman I think from the reform wing of feminism. But Geraldine Ferraro her seasoned look, okay, and the way she's able to smile and go for the jugular against the men and so on. She is fabulous, and I think that again, our future woman leader, the woman who is going to be the first woman president, should really be watching how Geraldine Ferraro performs on Crossfire. It is amazing how she gets the knife in and gets the knife in. It's extraordinary. I do not feel, as many other feminists do, that Miss Hillary Clinton, all right, or Mrs. Clinton, all right, is an appropriate model for the presidency. I feel that Hillary Clinton would have made a splendid senator and possibly governor, but I don't know, it would have to be one of the bi-coastal states, nothing from the Midwest. What Hillary lacks, which her husband Bill has, is that kind of exuberant pleasure in the physicality of political life. Bill Clinton just loves to wade into a crowd, hand him a baby, he'll kiss that baby. He is the stereotypical baby-kissing candidate. There he is. It is that he just loves it. And when children are around, he beams and so on. You know, and you just can't imagine Bob Dole having that kind of spontaneity. That kind of emotional malleability, okay? So Clinton's gifts are also his failing. That is, he just adapts himself to every possible situation, which is why he has no fixed convictions about anything. I mean, whichever way the wind is blowing, he'll just go in that direction, go in that direction, go in that direction. What it makes him a wonderful television president, and I think an appropriate president for the 90s, is what frustrates people when they expect consistency from our leaders. But Hillary does it for all the acting of the wonderful mother, et cetera, et cetera. Now, she is that cold, clear mind, that rather superior mind, which I admire very much. She and I are exact age mates. Indeed, here we are in the very building where Hillary and Bill met. In the lounge of this building. Miss Hillary heard Bill boasting about the size of Arkansas watermelons. And she asked someone, "Who is that?" Sparks flew. Sparks flew. So you see, the path to the presidency begins in the Yale Law School lounge. And that we were here the same time. I was across the street in the graduate school when she was here, so I identify with her strongly. I see in her all of the best and the worst of this first generation of second wave feminism. The first wave being, of course, the suffrage movement of the 19th and early 20th centuries. But there's something a bit too brittle about Hillary, I think, to be a president. America is an enormous country. An enormous country. It's filled with contradictions. I mean, our greatest poet of America remains Walt Whitman. In order to do justice to America, Whitman had to invent these long, copious litanies with everything in there, with geographical names and all of the animals and all of our multiple, races and ethnicities and so on and so forth. So this enormous epic sweep that is America, it requires a kind of personality who is also complex. So that is something else that women must think about if they want to break through the glass ceiling to the presidency, okay? You must be fair, you must be just to the complexity of America. You cannot just bring to bear on America what Hillary Clinton and her coterie too often do, which is a kind of elitist premise coming out of Cambridge, New Haven, New York, Washington. There is a real insularity to too much thinking in this country. I live in Philadelphia, and I can feel how strong that is when I go up to Cambridge or when I go to Washington. And if I feel it, for heaven's sakes, and someone who is in the media quite a bit, how much more so than people who are living in the Midwest, living in Montana, living in the Pacific Northwest, and so on. All right, so I think that we need to broaden the imagination of our future politicians, and you broaden that imagination through literature and through art in order to give people the vision to be able to govern. And, alas, in too many places today, not just in the Ivy League, but elsewhere, there's a certain style of teaching literature and art that I think is disastrous. Absolutely disastrous. Our young people are being trained to be ironic, to be ironists, to come at great literature and art with a kind of prefabricated agenda, coming at great works with a red pen in hand and marking check, deficient, racism, sexism, homophobia. That is a disaster for the creative imagination. Alas, that school marmish kind of attitude toward important works is, I think, clear in Hillary Clinton, who now and then gives an effective speech, but too often has a kind of hectoring delivery, as she did at Beijing. And when she tries to, the Women's Conference at Beijing of last year, and when she tries to moderate it, as she did at the Democratic Convention, she has a kind of way of talking which is like, I am the superior figure here, and you are the children, and I'm going to explain it all to you now. Now, there's something wrong with this, okay? There's something wrong. People's attitude toward Hillary Clinton, when critical, is not simply a matter of people being uncomfortable with strong women. That is a ridiculous argument. Oh, they don't like strong women. Give me a break. I mean, the feminist establishment, which gives me a lot of grief, you know, I'm a strong woman. I mean, they don't like strong women either, okay? There's a certain, women have to be aware, right, that again, that men, through perhaps thousands of years of male bonding, their ability to work in groups coming down from the hunter-gatherer period, who knows what, okay? Men know how to schmooze, okay? Now, women are great. We nag, we hector, we're great at that, all right? But schmoozing, that is just sitting around and with your feet up and, you know, chewing the fat and that kind of thing, that is really the bread and butter of politics. A lot of that goes on, all right? A lot of it goes on in corporations, a lot of it goes on in politics, it's what goes on in the cloakrooms at the Senate, and so on, all right? Now, what I am very concerned about with this sexual harassment hysteria that has gotten worse and worse and worse is that women are now being shut out of those very groups that was crucial for them to gain entrance to, all right? If men are now worried that the woman they're schmoozing with, okay, in an unguarded, unbuttoned way, is going to turn around next month, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, like Anita Hill, and slap them with a sexual harassment suit, what are women doing? Women are cutting their own throats, okay? You want to talk about a glass ceiling, it's going to be a steel ceiling, right? There will be no mentoring of women by men, right? Once again, we're going to have a return to the old days, as when I arrived here as a graduate student, when Maury's was totally male, and it took, oh, applause for that, right? And it took quite a nasty little lawsuit, and the threat by the state of Connecticut to withdraw the liquor license from Maury's, and so on, for that brought Maury's to its knees. Because at that time, it was customary for law firms from New York City to come up here and have interviews in Maury's. Right? And it was the female law students who objected to this and said that this was discriminatory. And the law firms would say, well, we'll have an interview with you over here in a classroom or whatever. Okay, so it was really the generation of Hillary Clinton's generation of law students that broke that down. But that was the direction of of feminism when it reawoke in the late 60s, early 70s, and I think it should have stayed on that track of women able to deal with men in an easy day-to-day basis, women able to listen to dirty stories without blushing, right, and thinking it's sexual harassment. I mean, deal with it, okay? This idea now of public discourse and even private conversations being purified and censored according to whose standard? Queen Victoria? This was not this was not what my generation of 1960s women thought was going to happen. When I arrived in college in 1964, we did everything in our power to use every single dirty word that sailors and the workmen had been using for centuries. We considered that part of the revolution, to appropriate the pornographic films and the pornographic magazines and the interest in all kinds of risque topics, and to use that kind of salty language that had been reserved for men all those centuries. So what in the world has happened that somehow late 70s and 80s feminism made a turnaround, this reversal of direction, and now is demanding in this schoolmarmish way this standard of prudery in professional conduct, instead of women showing that they can be out there and deal with life on an ordinary basis. I mean, the stories are legion, of course. The story at the Boston Globe where a woman staffer overheard a male staffer saying to another one, saying, "Come out drinking with us," and the guy said, "Oh no, my wife, is waiting for me at home." And the male staffer said, and I don't dare to use the phrase, he said, "Oh, you're whipped." All right, he said to the man. A woman staffer overheard this. What is this? Stalinist Russia? Overheard it. It wasn't even directed at her. Went and complained to the editor. Okay, the male reporter was penalized, was fined a tremendous amount. It was like $1,000, something like that, and sentenced to sensitivity training. Okay. I mean, what are we doing? It's like absolutely crazy. You have these like neurotic prudes running around calling themselves feminists to explain their own twisted souls. Anyway, all right. And finally, all right, I would like to talk about an argument based on mastery. The women have shown very recently how superior they are. Let me take the example of Bob Dole and Liddy Dole. Look at their handling of platform body language. We have Bob Dole taking a dive off the front of a platform, but getting up again very quickly. Liddy Dole, in contrast, with her mic pinned to her, wearing high heels, trips her way down, okay, the central podium of the Republican convention. Do you realize how risky that was? The men in this audience, except any drag queens that might be here, have no idea. No idea. Liddy Dole was in high heels. It could have been a recipe for disaster. Look at her, she was talking at the same time, right? Talking and talking and talking, not even looking. And she came down into the audience with her high heels, and there she was, and commanded the whole thing. And I mean, it was really kind of vampiric performance. It reminded me a tiny bit of Faye Dunaway as Joan Crawford in Mommy Dearest. But it was sensational. Performance by a woman, I feel. Right there, you see that woman is on a trajectory for leadership in this country. So therefore, Madam Speaker, I affirm the resolution. What America needs is a female president.
The body to please phrase all questions in the third person. That being said, are there questions for Ms. Paglia? Gentlemen.
I'd like to ask Ms. Paglia, while I agree wholeheartedly with her point that it's high time for a woman to be in the highest office of the country, I wonder about some of her more gross generalizations of the sexes, that men are dull and narrow-minded and that they thrust at everything, while women have this greater consciousness from all the women that they have, from all the children that they have, and that they're far superior. And I'm wondering if she would agree that this breeds the kind of sexism that has put women in the back seat for the last 220 years. And also, if you wouldn't agree that it would be the best idea for a president would be to have someone, the best qualification would be someone who didn't share the sexist views that you have.
Well, Madam Speaker, actually I attributed dullness not to all men, but to male politicians in America today. And what I said about the male consciousness as being very focused, like a laser beam, actually I've written extensively on that in my first book, Sexual Personae, and I talk there about the huge achievements of men. In fact, that's what got me in a terrible trouble with the feminist establishment, that I dared to break ranks by speaking of the grandeur of the male past, not just works of art, but of construction projects. I speak of the climax of the first chapter of Sexual Personae, of the George Washington Bridge, and speak of all the great bridges in America as being an example of male poetry writ large, and so on. I think that, yes, when you say that I'm thinking in sexist ways, I think it is true that my generation of women in the 1960s thought that there was a false double standard and that it was incumbent on us to throw out all the stereotypes of the past and to begin anew. When I was 13 in 1960, I believed that there were no sexual differences. I thought that the whole thing was a crock, that we're born exactly the same, and I would say that, you know, I began to reverse my position on that in graduate school as part of my research in Sterling Library and in the medical school library and so on. And step by step, what I have done over the last 30 years is begun to see that there was a certain wisdom in the sexual differentiation from the past, the great mythological archetypes and so on that contemporary feminism had thrown out, those of the vampire, the femme fatale, and so on. I've done everything in my power to bring those back, and I feel it's one. That's why I've called my last book "Vamps and Tramps." The vamp figure, which is a typical kind of sexist stereotype, I think shows women's sexual power. What I call for in my thinking is a kind of distinction between the public and private sphere. I'm saying that the mission of feminism should be about women seeking equality of opportunity in the public social sphere. But where I depart from so many of my fellow feminists is that I see that there's another sphere, the private sphere, where sexual relations take place, where dreaming takes place, where the creation of art takes place, that may overlap the public sphere. There may be 1/3 of each circle overlapping. That is, so there, feminists are correct when they say the personal is political, but that we cannot always apply the models of sexual relationship or what's going on in the turbulence between mothers and sons, for example, or in the kinds of territoriality and adjustments, psychological adjustments that every marriage, every heterosexual marriage must make, and so on. We can't automatically apply those to the workplace. So I call the workplace the arena. And in the arena, there must be equality. All right. So our first woman president must go into the arena. But it may be that she brings into it all kinds of sexist truths or sexist insights that we cannot and should not purge out of human consciousness.
Further questions? Mr. Cavender.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would ask the guest why it is she thinks that conservative women seem so much more successful in politics than liberal women. She could expand on that.
Yes, I think that, that too much liberalism is based on feeling. As what Bill Clinton says, I feel your pain, that kind of Oprahization of contemporary politics. Now, I love Oprah. I adore Oprah. I was just on Oprah, and so on. Talking about date rape, the usual theme. But I think that, that for some reason, the conservative women look at life in quite a different way. It's almost pre-Rousseauist. It is kind of a pre-modern way of looking at civilization as the source of law and order. And therefore, they have this, especially if conservative women are traditionally religious, and have deeply studied the Bible, they have a kind of grand historical sweep to their thinking that I find sorely missing from liberal women. Now, I call myself a libertarian Democrat, not a liberal, although I would like to say that I'm a liberal in the old style, before it was corrupted by this feel-goodism, this mushiness. There's a mushiness and a kind of condescension built into liberal thinking. Look at Patricia Schroeder's face. I mean, when she talks, it's like this constantly crinkled in this, like, I'm concerned, I'm feeling your pain, I'm concerned. It's embarrassing to me. But when I see some of those conservative women on the talk shows, like Kate O'Byrne and so on, I'm amazed. They have almost like a military edge to the way they express themselves. Now, I've noticed this for a number of years. I thought, these conservative women are much more realistic. When I've met them, I thought, they're pragmatic. They see life the way it is. They see life as tough. And it's necessary for us to be tough, to survive in life. Whereas the liberal women seem to want cushions everywhere. Cushions. Yes, life is tough, but we don't want to feel it. We want everything to be comfort. We want to feel good, feel good, feel good. And that has been disastrous, I think, for liberalism. It's been disastrous for education. There has been a massive decline in the quality of education, as people are afraid to harm the socialization of the young. We can't hold them back. True, he can't read, but we don't want to hold him back in his grade, because that would lower his self-esteem. So we'll just keep on passing him and passing him and passing him until finally this poor fellow is graduating from high school unable to read. Okay? Now, I think that conservative women are perhaps they're more ready to give pain. Maybe that's it. There could be a S&M element to it. I don't know.
Further questions? Mr. Sklar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, given that the only woman ever to win an electoral college vote in America was on the Libertarian Party ticket, and the Libertarian Party vice presidential nominees in 1988 and 1992 were both women, I was wondering if perhaps the guest feels that perhaps the Libertarian Party is the source of salvation for women in politics in America.
Well, Madam Speaker, I thank the questioner. A terrible problem with American politics is our being so locked into a two-party system. It's very, very difficult to get a third party going, as we all well know. It cannot be done from the top, bought in the way Ross Perot has tried to do it. You cannot just come into it with a big bank account and buy infomercials on TV. If a real third party will have to begin at the grassroots level and build up. They have to start running slates of candidates in the local elections, state elections, and then eventually produce a presidential nominee. I would hope that the third parties begin to realize they need to do that, not just sort of every fourth year sort of decide, as Ralph Nader has something to do, I think I'll enter, okay? Well, there should be a much more organized Green Party in this country, as there is, for example, in Germany and so on. But again, it requires people to go out and to do the work, okay? You cannot take shortcuts in politics. Now, the problem really is that our country, again, is so large, so complex, so that our parties are essentially big umbrellas. The platforms usually say nothing. There's so much in them. They're the giant laundry bags of stuff that's in these platforms, and even the presidential candidate often can't even run on his own platform. I think it's because our country needs unification. We require symbols of a consolidation. It is so, we are always so near flying apart, fragmenting, atomizing. That's been a danger that the Founding Fathers were aware of right from the start when they tried to make the 13 colonies into a single unit. And of course, we suffered over a century ago of, the country practically broke down right there, flew apart into two separate nations. So I think that the parties don't quite play the role that they might in other countries where you have 13 different parties, each representing a certain sliver of the political spectrum, but then paralyzing politics, because nothing can get done without people having an ad hoc coalition, which then can break apart and so on and so forth. So it's very, very difficult. I think it would be very healthy for our politics if we could get a credible third party going. Now, the Libertarian Party actually sent me a letter and asked if I wanted to run for the Now, I am not a good presidential material. I am not a diplomat. I am a warrior. So I would think, I would hope that in the administration of the first woman president, I might be asked to take over the Air Force, possibly. I'm well known for my bombing missions over the Ivy League campuses. This is nothing. This has been a very pleasant evening, but when I go up to Harvard, boy, do I strafe them. I strafe and I bomb. And my animus against Harvard is based on the Harvard-Yale football game. Over so many years of Harvard coming down here and spoiling Yale's perfect season and so on. Oh, my animosities built up over the years. But at any rate, I think that, again, the Libertarian Party has a lot to offer, but it's got to start thinking about the year 2000 now, in the year 1996.
Further questions? Gentlemen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was wondering if the Speaker has considered running for president herself.
Well, no, I don't think I would be good. I am, you know, I'm an Aries, like Betty Davis and Joan Crawford, and we are very intemperate. Okay? We brook no fools. Right? I'm terrible. I completely lack the ability to be diplomatic. I can hardly, you know, comport myself in department meetings. I mean, I'm horrible. I mean, I always show way too much emotion. I mean, I'm terrible at committees. Terrible. I'll say to a committee, oh, why do we have to sit here for 3 hours going over the same? Just give me the thing, I'll get it done. Less time. I'm like this, so I'm not a good team player. But that, you see, that is something possibly that we need to teach young women. First, whether men are team players from biology or from social training, it is not entirely clear. But there's no doubt that men are able to work in groups in ways that many women find difficult. For example, I don't know whether this is again a function of my sexist belief in women's greater intuition and empathy, but I, for example, find it almost impossible to work with someone that I dislike. Absolutely impossible. I cannot conceal my detestation of that person. Whereas I notice how men have no such problem. All the time, men will come back from work and go, oh, that guy, what a jerk that guy is at the office, and they work very well together, very companionably. And the guy, then the husband comes home and like carries on. I think that is amazing to me. It is amazing that men have that ability, that kind of I don't want to use a vulgar locution in so august a setting, but they have a kind of I keep on thinking in slang here, but men have a kind of iron. They have a kind of armored way, okay, of dealing, okay, with other men, all right, and they're able to work together even when there's antagonism, okay. And now, is it that the boys have been trained in little league clubs and so on, or is it that little league clubs are themselves a function of male biological principles, an extrusion, as it were, okay, of the tendency of men to join in bands? In fact, I have theorized in my own work about the origins of male homosexuality. I have said that, I think that I'm the only one who suggested this, that for me, male homosexuality may begin in childhood in some kind of failure of young boys to bond in the group thing that almost immediately starts up among boys. Okay. Now, whether it is that the boy is, I've said is artistic, has an artistic tendency, is just not drawn to the kind of rough buffeting play that we know a lot of the other boys engage in, or because he's more drawn to his sisters or his mother or whatever it might be. I just have noticed this pattern over time. So I think that we don't know enough about this yet. The male bonding whether it's an instinct or whether, again, it's a socially constructed pattern that's inherited over time simply because of cultural incrementation, right? But I think that we need to study this if women are going to assume positions of leadership, right? That is, the psychodynamics of the group. Because women form groups sort of like, like chatter to each other, okay? But they don't accept necessarily a leader in that group, whereas almost immediately it's been observed of boys in rough play in childhood that a leader emerges, and he can be very cruel and very goading, and he terrorizes a pecking order that almost immediately starts in these groups of boys, like swirling circles of boys pushing and shoving each other and all this other stuff that's going on. And whereas girls tend to make pair bonding. So we know this, that they tend to have a best friend, they confide all their secrets to, they keep a diary, and there's all this kind of like back and forth. And there's all kinds of tests of it. In fact, Deborah Tannen, who attended my university, the State University of New York at Binghamton, 2 years ahead of me, so we come out of the same generation. She's written a number of she's actually a very learned linguist, but she has written a number of best-selling books talking about male-female communications. Now, she tends to believe that these differences are due to a acculturation, although she's really an agnostic on the subject, and that she doesn't really know. But she conducted a very interesting experiment. It was absolutely fascinating, where she had, there were boys and girls of different ages who were ushered into a room and told that there was going to be, something was going to happen, there was going to be an experiment later on, when in fact, what went on in the room was the experiment, and it was being filmed from behind probably breaking every law, from behind a glass wall. And what these were young children, they would, I think, anywhere from the ages of 8 to 16, something like that. And they had the girls go in and the boys go in, 2 each. There were chairs along the edge of the room, and the instructor or the person who was really doing the experiment said to them, just go in the room and sit down. We'll be in a while and we'll be talking to you. Just take some chairs and sit down, okay? And it was observed, this is remarkable, that the girls, no matter what age, they're strangers to each other, did not know each other, took chairs from the wall, sat the chairs in the center of the room, facing each other, and sat down and talked to each other, right? Straight on. Just looked at each other and talked to each other, blah, blah, blah. The boys of whatever age coming into the room would take the chairs, and they would line up the chairs side by side, and talk to each other, okay? And so there was like this bizarre sight of 2 boys next to each other, talking to each other, but not looking at each other, okay? Looking straight ahead. And now what is that? And where is that coming from, okay? That is boys' unwillingness to make eye contact, okay? Their discomfort with intimacy. Women immediately become intimate. Let me tell you, it's amazing. It crosses every borderline in the world. I know this because I've dealt with women reporters from Japan or from Germany or from Brazil and so on. I mean, women on the phone with each other immediately. It's like, boom, and you're communicating. There's something that goes on among women. The way, in fact, this movie, The First Wives Club, okay, that just came out with Bette Midler and Goldie Hawn and Diane Keaton, really captures this hilarity that women have when they're with each other. That immediately stops and turns into decorum when the men are around, and so on. Okay. Now, what is that about? In fact, Deborah Tannen has a very interesting thing that wives often complain that their husbands don't talk to them. The husbands don't talk to them. Like the husband comes back from work, and he goes behind the newspaper, and she wants to talk to him, okay? And she'll say, you're not listening to me. He's looking at the newspaper. I'm listening to you. And the wife feels that this is terrible. It's awful. He's not listening to her. In point of fact, he's a man. He is listening. He just doesn't want to, he doesn't he can't make eye contact, okay? He's looking. So what Deborah Tannen found was that women often say, they have their best conversations with their husbands in the car. We have a wonderful heart-to-heart things in the car. It's so wonderful. Well, Deborah Tannen figured out the man is driving and the woman is not forcing him to look at her, okay, and is accepting the fact that he's looking straight ahead, okay, you see what I'm saying? All right. So, at any rate, again, all right, we are in the infancy of understanding sexual difference. We do not know to what extent these things are due to something that's hardwired into the male and female brain, or something that is, there's something that's coming from our social environment. But anyway, these are questions that must be dealt with, okay, for any woman seeking leadership. To what extent is she a team player? And for women like me, if I had had the access, to kind of mentoring, this kind of conversation at all, okay, when I was young, I think my academic career would have been much more successful. But, I can't complain. But my academic career was a disaster, an absolute disaster, because of my inability to form these team bonds. So I think that this is the kind of practical, hands-on course that should be the substance of women's studies, but unfortunately, infrequently these days.
Perhaps a second final question. Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask the lady, in reference to her statement that football should be studied by all future women leaders as a microcosm of war. Which football strategists and strategies does she admire, and why?
Madam Speaker, I thank the questioner. I find, well, if I were to be born again as a football player, I would, there are two positions that I most envy. One is tight end. I love that, where you have a big guy who catches the ball over his shoulder and then boom, knocks everybody down over the goal line, and just the whole defensive line just falls over as he goes right over them. And the other one I very much admire is the position of free safety. I love that, the sort of the individual roaming in the backfield, and then appearing out of nowhere, okay, and then whap, hitting somebody with that open field kind of tackle. I think I specialize in that, actually, coming out of nowhere and whap. That's all. The hard hit, you see. Now, again, this has been observed that most young girls don't like rough play. The ones who like rough play, rough, buffeting kind of play, have been called tomboys. To what extent are these tomboys, do they have like some heightened, male hormonal level? Where is it coming from? I don't know. All I know is that from the moment I first saw football, I said, that's it. And I would love to have been able to have played it. The hard hits, knocking people down. Most women that I know don't understand the pleasure in that. They just don't understand it. They don't understand the pleasure of attacking, okay, and running right over somebody and leaving them with tire marks over their body in the middle of the field. They don't understand it. All right? In fact, I have often been struck by how many times I am asked by people, by successful white middle-class women, they'll go, well, you're so controversial. I go, yeah. You say all those things. Why do you say all those things? Are you, why? How could, don't you, all those people, people attack you, people criticize you. I go, yeah. Isn't that go with the territory? If you're an independent, original thinker, okay, that you cause controversy, people will attack you. I don't know how you do that. So I've seen this again and again and again, that too many women want to be liked. They want approval, okay? They're afraid to express themselves, and I just don't understand that. So football teaches you, first of all, it teaches you to have the long view of things, all right? It forces you to plan, to strategize, to march systematically toward a goal, okay? And you've got to be good in long-range conceptualization and in the short, hard hit, okay? It's in the pit. It's also in the pit, which our American television too often ignores with its narcotic addiction to the scoring. The scoring is unimportant. The true football fan knows it's all happening in the pit, okay, with the offense and defense, the grunting and the smashing and the big bison hitting each other, and then that's where you can make the space for the quarterback, who's always like this kind of a feet guy, okay, to toss the ball, Really. Old-style football, as practiced at Yale, was much more a mudder game. It was like old-style rugby, where everyone's in the mud, on all these carpets. Carpets, the AstroTurf. What kind of a sport is that, AstroTurf? Twinkle toes, this is not football to me, okay? I like the kind of football that's deep into the elements, all right, that meets the elements head on. Unlike baseball, they call it baseball, it drop falls and they call it baseball, you know, but football before the age of the Astrodomes, oh God, those domes, those artificial environments, turns football into ping pong, okay, and so on. In the old days, the great era of the Pittsburgh Steelers and so on, Franco Harris, you know, Franco Harris would get better. The deeper the mud was, the better he was, and the more the snow fell, the better they were. Their ability, their tenacity, under very negative conditions and so on. Now, I also admire football, not only for its the mathematical strategy, trying to fool. I love fooling, okay, fooling, like, you know, like you have like a misdirection play, pretending to be going in one direction, when in fact, ha ha ha, and in the other. I love that, okay? I've done that. I've learned a lot from football. In fact, I pulled some of those plays on the feminist establishment. I really did. Okay, I did misdirection plays. I sent them in one direction. They all went galloping and stampeding here, and then I was over here, okay, and so on. And they don't know where to get me. I'm here, I'm there, and so on. All right. So I'm inspired by football. Football is my pagan temple, in point of fact. Right? And I think it is a wonderful instruction for life. You think, let's say, you know, here you have a fantastic season, fantastic, and you win the championship, and you're right into the Super Bowl, okay, and then you lose in a humiliating fashion in the Super Bowl, okay, even though you were the best in your conference and so on. You have to wait until next year. I mean, it's horrible. You have to wait until the next year, and your pride is wounded, and you have to gather yourself. So to me, it's very Iliadic. It's very Homeric. It has to do with focusing your energies and making yourself the best you can be, but also being very adaptable, because all the best laid plans in the world, once you go onto the field, can like just fall away. So you have to like adapt and be able to improvise. I think football is a game of both strategy and improvisation. So I've learned an enormous amount from it, and I feel that there's too much flack in the air coming from feminists about it. You know, they're constantly, oh, football players are rapists, and you know, and on and on and on. There's a couple of women, professional feminists, who go around the talk shows hammering at football with no. I know there are plenty of women football fans out there. I think that we should demand equal time on the airwaves about it. All right. Anyway.
For a final question, the gentleman.
What can parents and teachers do towards raising more female presidents?
Well, Madam Speaker, this is a very important issue, the issue of education. And there is unfortunately a kind of distorted liberalism in the way these sexual harassment guidelines have been put into effect in the classroom and so on, that I think is counterproductive for the raising of future female leaders. As a teacher of 27 years, I'm very experienced dealing particularly with freshmen. And in my ill-starred academic career, I have taught in a wide range of courses in universities, not just Yale. I went through briefly as a visiting instructor and so on, but the University of New Haven, and I taught on-site in the Sikorsky helicopter plant out there to adult education, night classes and so on. I've had a huge variety of students, and I feel that the kind of garbage that's coming out of the media these days on the subject, for example, of self-esteem. The AAU, the American Association of University Women, the AAUW, which should be the upholder of the highest standards for women academics, has turned into a propaganda mill, all right, that endorses the worst, flawed studies about self-esteem. And Christina Hoff Sommers, in her book Who Stole Feminism, has documented many of these abuses. This idea that girls in the classroom are being shortchanged, that teachers pay more attention to boys. You hear this repeated constantly by people in the media who have swallowed whole that pile of tripe the AAUW studies. It is not true. It is all lies. It is absolutely not true. Teachers do not pay more attention to the boys. If that is seen, what it is the boys are misbehaving. They're behaving like jerks, okay? And the teacher is going, shut up, okay? Put your feet down, and stop chewing gum. Now, the kind of schools I've taught in, they're not like Yale. I constantly have to monitor and discipline the class, okay? And it is very rare that I have to discipline girls, okay? The girls are there, and they are concerned not to be embarrassed, okay, in front of the class, and so on. They're often very quiet, and I, as a teacher, can clearly feel what comes to me from so many of the girls, which is don't call on me, don't embarrass me. Now these are girls who are doing like, will get like 99% or 100% on the exams and so on, all right? Now I'm one of the biggest talkers, okay, that you can imagine, but when I was a student, I like to just sit there. I didn't want to be harassed, okay, by being called on and all that stuff, okay? So my philosophy as a teacher is, if people want to volunteer something, that's fine, but I'm never going to embarrass someone unless they deserve it, okay? I'm never going to embarrass someone by calling on them, okay? And maybe it's, again, I'm being sexist, as a woman, I'm very aware of the mood of everyone in the class at every given time. I teach 8:30 classes, so I have to be, and I often have to like energize them. They're always in a kind of narcolepsy, state, and so on and so on. So I'm always reading their faces, okay? And the boys are a mess. Boys take forever to mature, okay? And they need structure. I mean, now and then you have a sensitive, male artist, okay, who needs, bringing out and so on. But usually the boys are just out of control. Whether it's their raging hormones or what, I don't know, okay? But the point is this, okay? My attitude toward the classroom and toward the instruction of girls is simply that if there is an equity in the classroom, if you do see examples of the boys ganging up on the girls, I've never seen it yet. The girls are always way in advance of the boys in terms of maturity, in terms of self-discipline and so on. There's the occasional boy who does as well as the girls. But then, obviously, it's the teacher's responsibility to break down every kind of a clique, to break down every kind of harassment and intimidation. If, however, you have cases, complaints, occurring in the corridors, in the schoolyard, in the lounge, okay, on dates, stay the heck out of it. Okay, the authority figures have no business meddling in the social lives of students of any age. Now, this example of the little boy who kissed the girl is a good example of it, and so on. And that was observed by an authority figure, observing it. Oh, the little girl didn't like it. Well, excuse me, the answer is not to discipline the little boy. The thing is, the girl is the one who needs some help. It's her parents who are responsible, okay, for having raised a little twerp who was unable to say to the boy, I mean, do you know these kids are the same size? You can whip a boy at that age, for heaven's sakes. This little girl should have smacked him one. Okay, this is the Italian style. Smack him. Okay, I believe in physical. I got fired from Bennington College, for getting in a fight. I've punched men. I have kicked men. I have done so. I have wielded the sword, as it were. Okay, my entire life. That we must empower the girls. Okay, to be able to stand up for themselves. Again, in the corridors, in the schoolyard, in the lounge, and on dates. This business of bringing in the all-seeing eye of Big Brother to make sure not the way to produce strong women, to have an intrusion by authority figures, whether teachers or superintendents or lawyers, into women's dealing with boys on a day-to-day basis. The schoolyard should be a place where women learn to be strong, not where women continue their infantile dependence on the authority figures who have protected women for so many thousands of years. So I would hope that our first female president would be a woman who speaks for all women, but also all men. A woman who represents all genders, all, at last count, 15 of them. I include drag queens in that as well. Are there drag queens here? I do not. We want a kind of a leader who I think was very well typified by Governor Ann Richards of Texas. The Texas feminists had a kind of feistiness and robustness that I think so many East Coast feminists often lack. My theory about that is that the Texas women still feel very close to nature. They're pioneer women. Even when Governor Ann Richards was all dolled up with her blonde chignon and her pearls and her suits and so on, you could see the kind of woman who was out there helping to herd the cows and on the ranch and and there are so many other examples too. I've written about the Marjorie Main character who runs the ranch for divorcees at Reno in the film of The Women, and you have an incredible power to the old rural women that too much contemporary feminist rhetoric fails to take account of. Too much of current feminist ideology is based on the premise of the white upper middle class woman. when in fact the women of the countryside, you can see wherever you go to a small village, not just down south or in New England and Vermont, but anywhere in the world, in my own, in Italy, where my mother was born. The women are extraordinarily aggressive, extraordinarily outspoken. The feminist, conventional feminist portrait of history as nothing but male oppression and female victimization is quite wrong. People who have projected that scenario have given to young women, number one, a poisoned heritage filled with lies. But beyond that, there is a kind of distortion of the actual experience of women. I think that you can feel some flavor of that greater freedom of the rural woman in the Odyssey, in that episode where Odysseus wakes up on the beach and has shipwrecked, he's nude, he's covered with leaves and so on, apparent sex and enjoyment of same, totally pure. We are ready now for a woman to take over and to be the ultimate symbol of the next millennium. I would ask the deity of that period to be not Zeus, not Jehovah, but Athena. Athena, born parthenogenetically from the brow of Zeus, stands for woman's mental energy. She is an armed goddess. She is a guerrilla fighter. She's ready for war. She's ready to command the military, as any female president must. So I ask that the next millennium be, again, characterized by a woman and be inaugurated by our first woman president. And I base my appeal to astrology on my identity as a 60s person. Astrology is too little spoken of these days. Alas, it still is consigned to the bottom of the comics page in daily newspapers and the back of TV Guide. But every single woman's magazine has an astrological page. This is often overlooked, you see, by feminists and others. Women tend to believe in the great cycle of nature, the great wheel of the universe. So I feel that, again, astrological synchronicity makes it imperative that a woman take power in the White House in the year 2000. Next, I have my argument based on efficiency. That is, woman seems to me, by virtue of being a woman, to have a kind of power of organization, an ability to operate on a day-to-day level in a kind of multi-tracked basis. Man has tunnel vision. Man is narrow, intense but narrow. Man's consciousness is like a laser beam. Sexually and mentally, man plunges forward but sees nothing at all of context. Woman's consciousness is global in every sense. Woman sees the full perimeter of any given room, any given social situation, and therefore how appropriate that a woman should take power in the White House and therefore exert power on a global basis. Is this something that nature has given woman as a special gift? I think this is an idea coming out of my own women's course at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, that possibly woman's history as a mother, and a mother of once very large families, families that were 6, 8, 10, 12 children, it may very well be that woman's brain is extraordinarily complex to be able to intuit the special needs of her progeny who are at every single age of development. This is an advanced form of consciousness that no man is capable of. A woman who has a newborn and also a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, she has to be thinking on so many different levels at any given moment. Now, men, as we well know, are incapable of really contributing fully to the household. We know this, that every attempt by my generation to draft men into equal work has failed, that ultimately woman remains master of the household, and the husband, who may indeed be sweeping the floor or taking out the garbage or doing the beds, is simply one of many peons in woman's system. Woman still assigns him his tasks. This is well known. Ask around. All right? The man is incapable of actually doing the kind of complex scheduling that any housewife must do. The soccer moms, who are so much debated these days, the soccer moms who rush off and deposit their children at the game and going back and forth between household chores and their own jobs and managing their husbands and so on. These women are ready for the White House. All right? The kinds of organizational skills that these women are exercising on a day-to-day basis, it staggers the mind. These women are obviously, even though they may be suburban women, they are on a track to Washington. I expect to see them by the year 2000. Now, my next argument is based on example. We need a woman leader in the White House, and a woman leader who is not a slave to the feminist establishment. We do not want a woman leader we want a woman who believes in the great feminist principle of equal opportunity, but we do not want a woman leader who is on the leash of the Gloria Steinem contingent. We do not want a woman leader who believes in special protections for women, who believes in infantilizing women. A very typical example would be the sexual harassment guidelines that have gotten utterly out of control in America. Now, I personally, as a feminist, support moderate sexual harassment regulations and indeed lobbied for their adoption at my university in 1986. But the hostile workplace category, which has swelled up like a monstrous kind of dragon in America, has led to abuse after abuse, offenses to reason, leading to this ludicrous case of 2 weeks ago where a 6-year-old boy kissed another girl and was brought up on sexual harassment charges. America looks ridiculous in the eyes of the world. It is ridiculous. It is grotesque, this kind of intrusion by wooden-minded administrators into the everyday life of children. This is
a discussion on the need and prospects of electing a female president is next. We'll hear from author Camille Paglia. She spoke last month at Yale University. Her remarks last an hour and a half.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Yale Political Union. It is my pleasure to welcome back Ms. Camille Paglia for her third appearance on the floor of this body. Ms. Paglia received her bachelor's degree from SUNY Binghamton and received her master's of philosophy and her PhD from Yale University. She's currently professor of humanities at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia and is a renowned scholar, culture critic, feminist, and free speech advocate. Ms. Paglia is the best-selling author of Sexual Persona, Art and Decadence from Nefertiti to Emily Dickinson, Sex, Art, and American Culture, and her most recent work, Vamps and Tramps. Tonight, Ms. Paglia will present a keynote address on the resolution I will now move. Be it hereby resolved that America needs a female president. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Camille Paglia.
Madam Speaker and the Union, I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be here, and indeed in this space. As a graduate student from 1968 to 72, many times I was at the law school in this very auditorium where I saw many classic films, and indeed, a night I will never forget, saw All About Eve with the director here, Joseph Mankiewicz, and this is one of the cardinal points of my life, and it's a wonderful segue into tonight's topic that America needs a female president. because the Betty Davis and her performance in All About Eve, as one of the great products of the Hollywood star system of the 1930s and 40s and 50s, shows that America is used to a woman as dominatrix, and that the absence of a woman in the principal position in the White House is a historical accident that must be remedied as soon as possible. I have a series of arguments here for you tonight, and I think, first of all, the argument based on equity. After 200 years, 200 and a quarter really, quarter century of women having to listen to men, on, and white men too, I think the time has come in the year 2000 for women to move to center stage. Surely I speak for the women of America in protesting against the rapid the decision by the media in the last few weeks that the vice presidential debate between Al Gore and Jack Kemp is a forecast of the election in the year 2000. How dare they? With what smug complacence has the media already decided that these two white guys are going to be the principal nominees of our parties? It is outrageous. We women of America have been waiting since we finally gained the vote in 1920 for a woman to take power. We've had only one example of a nomination at the very top level, Geraldine Ferraro in 1984. It is no coincidence, may I say, Madam Speaker, that Geraldine Ferraro was Italian-American. I feel it is Italian-American women, yes. Italian-American women have the moxie, have the attitude, have the aggression, I feel, to be world leaders. But it is pathetic that in these 2 centuries we have the endless suits and the droning that goes on and the usual white men. Enough already. Okay, so we women demand equal time. Simply on the basis of the great feminist principle of equal opportunity, I demand that there be a candidate from one of the 2 parties for the presidency in the year 2000 who is a woman. Now, and it's about time as well that men experience power being leveled at them. It is a time that they take a submissive posture to power pouring down from a hierarchical position. Secondly, I would like to present an argument based on impatience, boredom, and tedium. I am simply tired. I am simply tired of it. I think that most women in America similarly are tired. The same old male voices, the same old arguments. There is a kind of dullness that male candidates seem to specialize in. Enough already. All right. Thirdly, I would like to present an argument based on astrological synchronicity. The Irish poet William Butler Yeats based his theory of history on astrology, the 2,000-year cycles that have been going on every millennium. We are approaching the end of the millennium. Yeats spoke of the great symbol of this past age, the age of Pisces, as being Mary with her infant child. The symbol for him of the age of Aries that preceded that was Leda, raped by Zeus and producing a vast number of eggs, which caused the Trojan War and a whole other series of disasters, but also which gave the subject matter to Homer and to Aeschylus and therefore launched all of Western culture. So, I say, our next 2,000-year cycle is about to begin, and following from the Yeatsian paradigm, we would expect a woman, similarly, to be a symbol, but no more Mary, the obedient and silent woman who conceives a son without